record. I think we're rocking.
Cool, cool. Oh, let's see, got it. Is it 9 o'clock? Looks like 9 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. We will wait for just a minute or two as folks slide in at 9 in the morning, and then we'll get rocking and rolling. Otherwise, the waiting room notification will keep beeping in my ear and throwing me off. So as we admit everyone who's coming in, I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Alexander Burke Roberson. I am a school administration consultant here at the Department of Public Instruction. I'm in an unnatural habitat for me. I have my computer stacked up on some books, and I'm using Zoom, which I was explaining to Sarah is my second language. It's not my native tongue. Teams is. So you'll have to bear with me as I roll through the day with y'all. So I appreciate your time and attention to this. I know that a 3-hour-long session can be a lot to sit through, but I would remind you that that's the same length of time as The Godfather Part 2, which is universally acclaimed as one of the best movies. So if you can sit through The Godfather Part 2, you can sit through LEA 101 Part 2, and it's arguably more important than the Godfather films. So we are going to have a lot that is covered today, but there's going to be a lot that is not covered today as well, and you're responsible for knowing that, even if we don't talk about it. Luckily for you, we have LEA 101 from last year, also 3 hours long, equally as good, hosted by the Works team on their YouTube page. I highly recommend that you watch that as well. A lot of the same information will be covered. A lot of the information that isn't covered today is covered there as well. And the nice thing about that is, since it's recorded, you can watch it at your own leisure. You can put it on while you're cooking dinner or something. So we are going to dive right in now that it is 9:03. And we are going to, let me click through to here. Can everyone see the new slides? Perfect. Okay. So how this is going to work is we're going to run from 9 to noon. Here are the topics that are going to be covered. I'm going to do a quick introduction to independent charter schools, very high level. It doesn't have really much to do with being an LEA, but it's some important stuff that you're probably going to want to know. And then if you have questions about it after or ever, you can always come and chat with me. Then we're going to go through all these presentations. I will be clicking through. So if any of our presenters are on here, your slides are already in here, we'll just click through them for you. You'll just have to let me know, oh, hey, time for the next slide. Except for Britt, her presentation is interactive. That WISE data interactive presentation is going to be real useful to you, since you're going to live and breathe that for the next 5 years of your charter term. So life as an LEA, basically why we're here, as you know, an independent charter school becomes its own LEA under state law. And so that means that you have all of the work of being a school and all of the work of being a school district, which is a fairly heavy lift. And so we have put together this presentation with teams from DPI with support of Works. with the support of a lot of folks to sort of give you a high-level overview of what being a local education agency looks like and remind you of the obligations that you have. You can see some of them here: civil rights obligations, ADA obligations, IDA obligations, 504, ESSA, FERPA, Mckinney-Vento, a whole slew of alphabets and federal programs that you are going to be required to know and comply with. And obviously, there are accountability metrics and accountability repercussions for these things. We discovered a few years ago that we were having a lot of work on the back end to help bring folks back into compliance. And one of the things that we heard from folks from independent charter schools was, boy, you know, we're really struggling hard to always be in compliance, but these are things that we wish we had known when we started, so we had them on our radar when we started working. And we thought to ourselves, okay, well, we can do something about that, and that's why we're here. So you can see here, I don't need to run through this list, but you're responsible as a school leader to your governing board. Your governing board is responsible to your authorizer. There's federal consequences. There's private rights of actions. There's a lot of different ways that you could be held accountable, and DPI is just one of them. But we do not want you to think of us as the compliance cops. Certainly we play that role, and there are times when we have to play that role because it's the right thing to do, and the federal government is our compliance cop, and they'll come in and say, how come you didn't hold these folks accountable? But what we really want you to think of us as is a partner in helping you navigate these bureaucratic burdens and make sure you're in compliance so that you can focus on educating kids, because that's why we all got into this business to begin with. So a quick disclaimer, this is a not all-encompassing our final presentation. It's a 30,000-foot view. You are responsible for knowing the Google Street View. You're not going to get a lot of Google Street View here, but we do think that this will help you get orient yourself as to what you need to do and when you need to do it. And the contents of this presentation are for informational purposes. They are not legal advice. You should have an attorney. If you don't have an attorney, I'm telling you right now, you should get an attorney. You are a mini school district and you're going to need one. And then you should talk to your attorney when you have legal questions. You can call me up, and every time you call me up with a legal question, you're going to hear the same thing. And you're going to tell me, Alex, yeah, I already know that, and I'm going to tell you it anyways. I'm not an attorney. I'm not your attorney. DPI is not your attorney. Talk to your own attorney. That being said, here's what we think, here's what we would do, here's how you would, where you're going to run into trouble. Okay, all that fun stuff out of the way. Here's some ICS basics, which I forgot from last year, has 1,000 click-throughs. And what does it mean to be an ICS? Okay, you're not authorized by a district. So that means, for the most part, you have statewide enrollment. That means there's no open enrollment. You don't have to use open enrollment periods. You don't have to refer to your enrollment as open enrollment. If you are in Kenosha and a student wants to come from Racine, they don't have to open enroll into KUSD. They will be able to enroll quick and easy. You're going to hear me use Kenosha a lot. That's not because there's anyone from Kenosha on this call, though there are. It's because I'm from Kenosha. I'm a proud Kenosian, and I am going to refer to it a lot. Independent charter schools cannot be virtual. As we make our way, hopefully, knock on wood, out of this pandemic, there will be discussions about how much virtual instruction you can have. We can have discussions. You're always welcome to talk to us about, well, I've got this program. Is this virtual? Is it not? Talk to your authorizer about it. Talk to us about it. But the important thing to know is you cannot be a virtual school. So if you think to yourself, boy, this sounds like a virtual school, then it probably is. So the most important question that you are probably thinking to yourself, which is, how do we get paid? You are going to submit 4 count reports. You're going to submit one in September, like early September. You're going to submit one shortly after the 3rd Friday in September, one in January, and then a membership audit. You're going to need an independent auditor to do the membership audit. Write that down now. Don't forget that you're going to need an independent auditor to do that membership audit. That is going to be due at the very end of April or like the first 2 days in May. So you submit those, and then you get paid. You get paid 4 times a year. That's in statute. You get paid in September, December, February, and June. If you do not submit your report on time, you are likely to not get paid on time. And so I really do encourage you to submit those things on time. You will be reminded that they're due. You'll get an email from me. You'll get an email from a whole bunch of people reminding you that they're due. You can look at the ICS program calendar for specific dates. That program calendar will be out next week. It usually does not come out this late, but it's that late this year. So you submit the pupil count report that's located on the ICS webpage. It is a big Excel file. Do not look at that Excel file and think to yourself, boy, I cannot do this. You can do it. The instructions on the webpage, you just fill it out, put your students in, it does all the math for you, and then you submit it through Kiteworks. It has to be on that Excel file because baked into that Excel file are a bunch of formulas that we use on the back end. So please don't look at it and say, boy, this is a really inconvenient spreadsheet. They really could make life a lot easier by doing it this way. I'll do it for them and then I'll submit it and they'll look at this and think, boy, this is the niftiest thing. We'll do that from now on. It has to be on that Excel file because there are a lot of formulas in there that you do not see that I have to dig out. And then please, 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 for the love of all things that are holy, identify the correct resident district for your students. Other than being on time for all the stuff that you're supposed to do, this is like the #1 thing that I will beg of you to please do right the first time, because if you do not, and it comes back on the membership audit, you will still get paid. Nothing bad will happen to you if you do not identify the correct resident district. Other than that, there's a lot of rigmarole with your auditor. All of that falls on this poor schmuck to compile all that data and correct it on the back end, because we use your numbers from your third Friday count to identify, okay, we have to give these title funds to this new LEA. We need to take them from these old LEAs. Where do they all come from? We use the resident district data that you submit to us to identify that. And if we have to correct it, and that just takes hours and hours and hours of my time. And it makes me pull my hair up. Okay, so who are your points of contact? You're going to meet a lot of folks today. There will be a lot of folks that you don't meet. Everyone at DPI is student driven, and we are committed to helping you navigate and meet your bureaucratic burdens so you can educate kids. Everyone who works in education because they care about those kids, and we do not want you to spend so much of your time jumping through hoops that your kids suffer. So that is why we're here. That is why we all get paid. Unless you have a designated point of contact on another team, you'll see them on the program calendar. You'll meet some of them here today. Always contact me first. I will be able to help you shake trees and figure out where you're supposed to go. Sometimes I'll know the answer, sometimes I won't know the answer, and I will facilitate you getting that answer. But please think of me as like a little hub to help you figure out where you need to go. Like I said earlier, always contact your board attorney. Your governing board should have an attorney because you're an LEA, you're a mini school district. Get an attorney, get an education attorney, don't get a tort attorney, get the right attorney and always rely on them. And then you always have friends at WRCCS at the Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools who are hosting this meeting for us. If you haven't met them, then you need to meet them. Sarah is on the call with us. They are a tremendous resource. I cannot sing their praises enough. When I was an authorizer in Tennessee, we had nothing like WRCCS, and you really should talk to them. And then, of course, always, as a former authorizer, please keep your authorizer informed. I can't tell you how many times as an authorizer in Memphis, the state would call me up and they'd say, oh, such and such just told us this. And I'd say, oh, it sure would have been nice that they told us that first. If you have a question, if you have a concern, your authorizer has great resources, is a great point of contact. They are not the only point of contact. They are not your only compliance cop. We are the big one. And so keep us informed, but always keep your authorizer informed as well. Okay, I think that's it, and it's 9:15. So is Brielle on the call? Let me see. She's here.
I am.
Brilliant.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning. So I don't know if you heard at the front end, but I will do the click throughing for you. So just let me know when you want me to click and we can get rocking and rolling.
Sure. So again, good morning. I am Brielle Glatzel. I am the Federal Fiscal Monitoring Consultant on the Title I team. So I'm going to do an overview of Title I Part A today, just a very, kind of skim the top sort of overview. I've also asked Brianna Pero, who will actually end up being the Title I application reviewer for the ICSs. So for individuals on this call, if you receive Title I funds, she's also here to hear the same information as you guys are all hearing. So yeah. You want to go ahead and click to the first one. So first and foremost, you can't really talk about Title I without referring back to ESEA, which is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It was first enacted in 1965 with the goal to reduce achievement gaps by providing all children fair and equitable education. ESEA was most recently reauthorized by ESSA in 2015. So just kind of good to know, the kind of the history of where Title I stems from. ESEA does include other titles, actually up to 10 different titles that really do have this focus of providing children significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and a high quality education in order to close those achievement gaps. And so while Title I in itself also has many components, today we're really just going to zero in on Title I Part A. And under the Title I Part A grant funds, we see them being targeted to high poverty school districts and they're supposed to be used to then provide supplementary education to students who are educationally disadvantaged or who are identified as being at risk of failing any of the state standards. Go ahead and click. Perfect. So Title I is based off of an allocation. There's two components that go into it. The state's average per pupil expenditure and LEA's count of children from low-income families. The poverty data, so the count for low-income families, at the state level, that poverty data is pulled from the U.S. Census Bureau, specifically the SAPE census. SAPE refers to the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates, and this is what we use to calculate Title I allocations at the state level. It should be known that when we pull the data, it's from 2 years prior, so there's always a bit of a delay for what the census data is and how it's going to drive the Title I allocation. For independent charter schools, though, the allocation is going to be calculated off of poverty counts of students by district using the resident district's poverty percentage. And so this one has a few clicks. Alex, I'll try to, as I'm talking about it, I'll try to be good at having a click. So like we said, like I said, the LEA's Title I allocation is based off of the LEA's U.S. Census Bureau's state poverty data and consists of as many as 4 different funding streams that you see here on this screen. There's basic, there's targeted, there's the financial incentive, and then there's also concentration. If you can go ahead and click. So first and foremost, at that first level is basic. And so if an LEA has 10 children in poverty and the number of those children in poverty exceeds 2% of the LEA's total student population, the LEA is then going to be eligible for a basic grant or to receive funds under the basic funding stream. If you want to go ahead and click. And then the next that we see is the idea of an LEA receiving funding streams under basic, targeted, and financial incentive. So these are going to be distributed to LEAs who have at least 10 children in poverty, but the number of children in poverty is at least 5% of the LEA's school-age population. So as you see, as the LEA's poverty percentage increases, they also then have an increase of the different funding streams available to them. This is important where we have some LEAs who potentially border between that 5% threshold. So for instance, if an LEA is at 4.99% poverty 1 year, and all of a sudden their poverty rate increases to over that 5% threshold, the funding allocation they receive is going to increase because initially they were only receiving funds from basic, but because they exceeded that 5% in that new year, they're going to have access to the basic, targeted, and financial incentive funding streams. Consequently, if an LEA was above 5% and all of a sudden drops to 4.99 or below, they are at risk of having a significant decrease in their Title I allocation because they went from having those 3 funding streams down to only the basic. If you want to go ahead and click. And then finally, we have LEAs with a poverty rate of 15% or more. And you can see now that they are also eligible for funding streams through the concentration grant. So they'll receive basic targeted financial assistance incentive, and they will also receive concentration. And this is where, again, if an LEA is borderline around that 15% poverty rate line, if they have a tendency to either decrease 1 year and then increase the next year, that's where they could see slight shifts in their Title I allocation, because going below that 15% will, will result in them not having that concentration funding stream. And so it's just important to keep in, and the other thing to keep in mind is as we're talking about basic targeted financial incentive and concentration, their funding streams, or there can also be kind of considered mini grants, but when it comes down to it, those are basically, it's reviewed all together. And when DPI does identify that this is the amount of funding an LEA is going to receive, the LEA only receives 1 Title I allocation. So the Title I allocation is made up of all of these different funding streams, but you as an LEA are only going to have to draw down and look at it as this one pot of funding. And you can go ahead and click. The next thing is there is equitable participation under ESEA. So ESEA contains provisions that require an LEA to provide equitable services to private school children who attend private schools located within the LEA's boundaries. These provisions are often referred to as equitable participation, and they are required under each of the title formula grants, so Title I, Title II, 3, and 4. However, since independent charter schools do not have geographic boundaries, there's not that requirement for equitable participation. And so this is something that does not is not something that is going to be part of your ESEA application process or something that you are required to meet. You might notice some different screens in WISE grants that refer to private schools. For the most part, you're not going to be, or not for the most part, you're not going to be required to complete anything with in relation to them. But it might be something where you see references to private schools or to equitable participation. But again, it's not going to be a required component of your title applications and, for the purpose of today, Title I. And then something that is part of your Title I application is this idea of reservations. So reservations are where you as an LEA can determine that you're going to take funds off of the top or you're going to set funds aside off of the top. And what I mean when I say off of the top is when you get that sum of that allocation, the amount of funding available under Title I from DPI, you're right away able to at the top of it say, we're going to take this amount of money off to designate it for a specific purpose. And this is happening before there's any sort of calculation related to the per pupil amount. Some reservations are required, and we'll actually cover those on the next slide. But then there are some that are actually optional, and they're just based off of the discretion of the LEA and to the discretion, kind of your program coordinators or your business office. Go ahead. Yep. So the two required reservations, the first one is the homeless reservation. So this is required for all LEAs. And the purpose of this reservation is to ensure that there are adequate funding sources available to provide services to students experiencing homelessness within your LEA at any time during the year. We have some really great consultants who specifically focus on this. So if this is an area where you're wondering of what use could, or what other purposes could these funds be used for to support those students, they can definitely give you some great guidance. There's also some FAQs on that too. If this is something that you haven't heard about before and you're kind of wondering, well, if we have to reserve these funds, well, what can we actually use these funds for? And I believe that actually that FAQ is linked on the homeless reservation screen in your Title I application. The family engagement reservation is required only if you're an LEA that receives an allocation greater than $500,000. So it's only going to be required if you do have that $500,000 allocation or more. And in that case, the requirement is at least 1% must be reserved to support family engagement activities. So like I said, family engagement, it kind of depends on your allocation. It can either be required, or if you do receive an allocation for Title I that is less than that $500,000 threshold, it is going to be considered optional. This is kind of based off of your planning for what you're going to utilize your Title I funds for this year. And if you really do have some key activities planned in relation to family engagement, it might be worth considering taking some of those funds off of the top. Other optional reservations include administrative costs, so costs associated with administering the grant. Centralized services, this is really only applicable if you are a charter school that has multiple schools. There's professional development, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's also individual reservations for each of the specific student groups that you may have attending your schools. And so it could be students who are in out-of-home care, or also referred to as foster care, students who are located in attending neglected or delinquent institutions, or students with migratory status. So there's actually separate reservations for all of those. And I would point out that there's a reservation for neglected, and then there's a reservation for delinquent. There's also, if your LEA is identified with a federal identification of TSI, which is Title I Targeted Support Identification, or CSI, so Comprehensive Support and Improvement Identification, there is then the ability to also set aside funds for financial resources or financial incentives. So when it comes to Title I school eligibility, for district LEAs, school building eligibility is determined through a very specific ranking process with different ranking options, and it's all based off of poverty, or at least all driven by the poverty percentages of each of the schools within the district. For most of the independent charter school LEAs, which would consist of a single school, the ranking is basically pro forma, and the per pupil amount is determined by dividing the available funds, so that allocation minus any reservations taken off the top, by the number of students identified as being low income. And for Title I, there are two different programs. There's the Targeted Assistance Program, where Title I services are provided to a select group of children. And then there's the School-Wide, which is where all staff, students, and resources are considered part of the Title I program. So schools may elect to operate as a Targeted Assistance Program or a School-Wide. Giving a little bit more detail about each of them is the Target Assistance Program is where supplemental services are provided to a select group of children who are identified as having the greatest need, or or most at risk of failing to meet the state's academic state standards. The purpose of the Target Assist program is to use title funds to improve academic achievement for those identified Title I students. The goal of the program is to improve teaching and learning and to enable those students who are identified to meet the challenging state performance standards. A targeted assistance program must include effective methods and strategies that rely on scientifically based research, which includes instruction from high qualified teachers and parental involvement activities, which speaks to that family engagement reservation and why there's that need for for program planning around having activities to include family engagement. Target assistance programs may include resources necessary to provide a well-rounded education. A school-wide program, on the other hand, is where funds are used to implement a more comprehensive type of strategy to upgrade the educational program in the whole school. And to increase the academic proficiency for all students within that school. Title I schools start as targeted assistance programs and then must apply to operate as a school-wide program. And once a school is then approved as having that school-wide status, it remains a school-wide status. So when you're starting out, a lot of time you're automatically assigned that targeted assistance program. And there is planning and there are certain conversations and there are certain planning pieces that need to be met in order to apply for and meet those requirements to be school-wide. In reality, we are that's where if this is something that transition is something that you are looking to do, if you are targeted or looking to become school-wide, or if you're starting out, if this is your first year, sometimes it's best to get that first year under your belt as target assistants, and then you can definitely reach out to DPI for support to the Title I team as you're navigating those different conversations around, meeting the requirements to apply for school-wide status. Sorry, if you could click, thanks. So when we talk about Title I, we talk about Title I eligibility, we also need to think of who are the Title I students. And targeted assistance, like I just got done saying, it's going to be those students who are specifically identified as needing additional services based off of a needs assessment process. It's a multi-step process where academic measures are used to identify those students who are eligible. And then basically you look at which students' needs rise the most above to the top of that list. And those are going to be the ones who receive services. And those are going to be the students that are referred to as your Title I students. It's important to know that your students do not need to come from low-income families to receive services. This is sometimes a misunderstanding that is prevalent around Title I because of this idea that per pupil amounts and things like that are driven by low income. That low income component is not attached or is not included when it comes to looking at whether or not a Title I or a student is eligible to receive services under Title I funding. In a school-wide program, when we talk about Title I eligible students, all of the students at that school are eligible and are referred to as Title I students because they're all part of that program. All staff are also included as part of the Title I staff. And then all of the families are Title I families. So there's this key distinction between targeted assistance where only those students identified, which then means only the teachers who are providing support to those students, and then only the families of those students are considered within the Title I program. When we look at school-wide, however, it is all of the students, all of the teachers, and all of the staff, and all of the families. You want to go ahead and go to the next slide. This then does also drive the idea of allowable costs and needs because since there is such a distinction between a target assistance program and a school-wide program, there's obviously going to be distinctions in what is allowable or how an expense is allowable and also what type of expenses and needs there are. For target assistance, funding can go to support services for the needs of the Title I students, parents, and educators. So really limiting it to what are the needs of those students and what are the needs of the teachers providing support to those students, or staff providing support to those students, and how can we provide support to those students' families. For school-wide, funds can go towards strategies that are identified as part of a school-wide plan. So a school-wide plan is a requirement to actually have that school-wide status. It is one of those requirements of you have to indicate that you have a school-wide plan in place. And it's basically the plan that is in place to meet, to improve the academic achievement level of all students. So what strategies are you going to do to improve the educational achievement for all students within the school, and what is needed to support those strategies? And then when it comes to looking at Title I allowable costs, there's two questions you should always ask yourself. The first is the proposed budget item addressing the needs of Title students? And then does the cost adhere to the Uniform Grant Guidance, EDGAR, and the LEA policies? So the other thing to keep in mind is when you hear things like Uniform Grant Guidance, often referred to as UGG or EDGAR, the LEA is required to have written procedures to determine the allowability of cost. And so these procedures are kind of what we refer to when we talk about the LEA policies, and they should include the steps for an LEA to ensure that the school is first off receiving its full share of state and local funds, also to ensure that you have procedures in place for tracking, this is your Title I funding and this is how this funding is being used. And part of that then is the LEA then having steps in place to ensure that proposed budget items is directly addressing the needs of Title I students. So it all kind of ties together of, under these two questions kind of tied together in the idea of you always have to keep in mind, what is Title I supposed to be used for? How are you meeting the needs of your students? But then also, as you're asking all of these questions, if you're doing the budget piece or you're looking to submit a claim, how is it then, how are we as an LEA adhering to the Uniform Grant Guidance and EDGAR? Do we have policies in place to make sure that we're budgeting appropriately, claiming expenses appropriately, things like that? Excuse me. The other thing to keep in mind is the federal grants in Title I also, we align with the state's fiscal year. So this means that a grant obligation period is going to begin on July 1st and ends on June 30th. So for FY23 or the 22-23 school year that we're getting ready to start off, the fiscal year started on July 1st of 2022, and it's going to end on June 30th of 2023. So the LEA is going to have has the ability to, it's going to have access to those funds for this entire year. And any of the funds that are not obligated and liquidated by the end of that fiscal year are going to be considered carryover. When it comes to Title I, there is limitation to carryover depending on the LEA's allocation. So if you receive less than $50,000, you don't have a limit to what you can carry over. So if, after all is said and done on June 30th of 2023, if your LEA had an allocation of $48,000 and you had only claimed 10,000 of it, you're not going to be limited to the amount that can carry over into the next year. If you have an allocation that is greater than $50,000 or equal to $50,000, you are going to be limited to the amount of money that you can carry over. And that is to 15%. So there's that limitation for that piece. The purpose for this is because, of course, in order to provide services, we're hoping, and the desire is for the funds to be utilized in that fiscal year, but also understanding that sometimes there's planning phases, or there's transitions of going to new curriculum, things like that, where sometimes LEAs like to purposefully carry over funds, or again, sometimes it's just maybe a plan was put in place and it wasn't exactly followed up on. the pandemic, I think, is a perfect example of a lot of LEAs had plans kind of fall through the cracks because there was a limit to supplies or even, vendors. There was a lot of issues the past couple of years of getting all the funds spent because of this. So it's just something to keep in mind of this idea of there is this 15% limitation if you do have an allocation of $50,000 or greater. And then when it comes to after the fiscal year, then those carryover funds are going to be available for the next year also. So again, if you have carryover from this year, you would then have access to that carryover from July 1st, 2023 till June 30th, 2024. So just because it's carryover doesn't mean it's going to have a limited time frame. It would be available to you for the entire next school year. And then some really great resources we have are the Title I shorts. These are 5 minutes or less, I believe. These are really great. They span a wide variety of topics specific to Title I. There's fiscal requirement coverage. There's more talking about poverty data and how that's the Title I allocation is determined for the district. These are a really great resource because, again, they're all 5 minutes or under. We also have the Title I website, and we are working on continuing to increase the number of technical assistance documents that we have available there, but there are definitely a handful on there, especially also, as I had referred to, the idea of if you're target assistance, but exploring the idea of going to school-wide or operating a school-wide program, there's an entire website based on the school-wide planning process and what steps are needed to be taken and what that application looks like. So definitely are both great resources. The other thing I would advocate for is, like Alex said, you can definitely always reach out to him. Bree Perro, who's on this call, is going to be your application reviewer. She is tremendously helpful. And then you can also always feel free to reach out to me too.
Did you see that there is a question in the chat? I can just go ahead and read it. It says, so and this is from Central Sands. So as a brand new LEA, are any of us eligible for mid-year Title I funding, being that we won't have student counts until September and the grant period / fiscal year has already started? Or would we not be eligible for funding until July 1, 2023?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there is the mid-year. There are instances of where new independent charter schools have received an allocation in that mid-year adjustment period. It's not a guarantee, so it kind of depends on, first, there's a lot of factors that go into place with that. So there is the potential for there to be an allocation available during that mid-year title adjustment. It's hard to say whether or not Central Sands would be one of those LEAs that may receive any sort of mid-year adjustment allocation. Otherwise, if you don't, then yes, it would be July 1st. So it's kind of hard for me to say yes or no, but do know that there are instances where yes, that can happen. But it really, there's so many factors that go into that Title I calculation. It would be, the DPI program accountant would have the best idea of where the LEA would stand for that. So, and at this point in time, I'm not quite sure if he would even have that information available. So you can always certainly circle back, with us about that too, to see if there is during that mid-year adjustment, as that approaches, if it's looking like potentially your LEA is going to receive an allocation at that point in time.
Thanks for fielding that.
Yep.
I saw that there is a question in the chat. I think this is just to me, but it pertains to everyone, about the PowerPoints and whether or not we will share them out. I promise you that we will get these PowerPoints to you so you can have them. Also, this is being recorded and hosted by Work. So if you feel like, oh yeah, Brielle said something that wasn't on the PowerPoint, but I really wanted to take that down, you will be able to see that as well.
Yeah. And
okay.
just, another disclaimer, feel free to reach out to me. I know I covered a lot of Title I components and kind of some of them a little bit more of the fiscal area of it, or kind of even, the more business rules of it. So definitely if you have questions regarding Title I or even around allowability to really dive into kind of expenses or things like that, feel free to reach out and we can definitely provide more or additional context, I think, more than anything.
Brilliant. Okay. Any other questions before we let her go? Okay. Great.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good rest of the time.
Bye, y'all. Okay, so we will move right along into accountability. I don't know if the accountability folks heard this before, but we've got your slide deck already up here, so you can just let me know when you want me to click through. I think I'm pretty good at context clues, but if I jump ahead, just tell me, hey, Alex, you jumped the gun, go back a slide. So do we have our accountability folks on the call? Michael, are you here?
Yep.
Brilliant.
Hi, Alex.
Hey, do you want to go ahead and get rocking and rolling?
Sure. I'll just introduce myself, and I'm going to speak briefly here, and then I have my colleague Lauren Zelmer, who will be able to speak more to assessments. She'll run through a few things, and Patrick Chambers, who's our communications consultant with OEA, and he's here for all questions. He's got a deep well of knowledge too. So if I can't answer your question, someone here will definitely be able to get to your question. So just to jump right into it, we're on the accountability side, or I should say, the Office of Educational Accountability has really two sides. One is accountability, which I'll talk about mostly in terms of report cards, state level report cards today, and then the assessment side, which Lauren will be speaking mostly to. To get right to the report card side of things, the state of Wisconsin has statutes at the state level that require all public schools to get state level report cards. So that does include charter schools, and that would include all of you as new LEAs or as charter LEAs. Slightly different, as maybe worth noting, that unlike choice schools, they get report cards for just their choice students. Charter schools, they get report cards for your entire LEA, as you are an LEA by law. Report cards typically, because of testing and other metrics that we use for assessments, typically require 2 years of at least 20 students who are enrolled in the full academic term to receive a report card. So schools that don't have enough tested students, including some new schools, which will pertain probably to some folks here, will participate in alternative accountability or alternate accountability, which I can get more into, and there'll be links to different pages that we have on alternate accountability on our webpage as well. So that may be a point in which we have a particular cell size. Many of you may fall in this category. We have a particular cell size of 20 students in order to publicly report assessment results in order to protect student identifiable information. So in order to protect that personal identifiable information, we have a cell size of 20 tested students, and so that would be the barrier for some of you as you get public report cards. Okay, so again, spending more time just on our state level report cards is the main accountability tool for the state of Wisconsin. The state level report cards are revamped a little bit. We've put them together, through a little bit of a process to make it look a little bit more pretty, a little bit easier to read for folks. So if you've worked somewhere else and seen report cards pre-pandemic, we've gone through some work to make them a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. And they have some core components on here, some of which are new, just to point out. The report card contains information around the overall score and rating, which is made up of and calculated through 4 different priority areas. It includes information and demographic information about the school on the front page. For most of you, that will just be or many of you, maybe just a single school for the LEA. It will have a star category. You can see how the priority areas of different of the different priority metrics are weighted, and the priority area scores and areas of metrics that we're gauging include achievement, growth, target group outcomes, which is a newer metric that measures essentially it's a report card for the lowest 25% of your students, and then on track to graduation metric, which will then have subsequent pages giving you lots of good details about those students and the data on those metrics. So for schools with grades 9 and 12, you'll also on your report card and later pages, not on the front page, you'll have course and program data that will include things like AP courses that are offered, technical training courses, work-based learning courses, etc. That will be included that you've entered in through your SIS. So that's an overview of the report card front page. For report card timelines, a typical year, as we would hope that we would have next year, a typical year, we would have 2 report card release dates. One would be slightly earlier with a preliminary or secure release, and then a public release that would be typically in November. So secure release is typically in October. You would access this as admin through the SAFE site that's you can find on DPI's website, I'm sure, and there'll be links here. This will include full student data, non-redacted data, and as an important note, this should never be shared. That's the secure preliminary release should not be shared. It is for the LEA only, and it has an important purpose of allowing you to internally review the data, to check the data, to understand the data, to possibly even let us know about inquiries that you have about the data. If something looks incorrect, that's our time to address that there. So that's for internal review and open for inquiry, which I'll talk more about the inquiry process in a second. And then the public release, again, is in late October, maybe early November, or later November. It depends on the inquiry process, quite honestly. And the final release has no more data inquiries available at that time. That's the final release. Those are publicly reportable report cards and are essentially PDFs that you can download and then share. So important note again, new schools in 2022, 2023 will receive their first report cards in the fall of 2023, right? Because we need years of assessment data in order to actually produce report cards and factor in those metrics. So those report cards will be rated using alternate accountability before then, because we only have data for the school. We only have so much data for the school. All right, Alex. Report card resources, just to direct you towards and if Alex sends you these slides, I'd really encourage you to take a look at our OEA webpage so that you can play around with some of these resources if you have questions about, okay, how do the priority areas line up, and how are they weighted, and how do each one of these priority areas work? How does the target group outcomes area, how do those calculations work? There's resources on our webpage for all of those different things, including the report card at a glance, if you want to actually look through the entirety of the report card and try to dig into some of these metrics. A couple of things to remind you about things that go into the report card. Your snapshot data every year goes into the report card, and this can be often forgotten, I think, by by choice schools and charter schools. So the first Friday of September counts are really important. That data does get factored into report cards. Snapshot data typically gets factored into report cards. So making sure you have fidelity in your reporting all the year round in those snapshots is really important. And so there's a link there on how to prepare for snapshots, and you can obviously reach out to other teams about that as well as us. The course and program data is also something that if you're a 9 to 12 school, that's something that's included as well. So we're trying to work with LEAs on, especially new LEAs on reporting that data correctly with fidelity, so we can make sure that that's accurate and ready for you, and looks good on report cards as well in this upcoming iteration. And again, there's more information on the inquiry process between the preliminary release and the public release. You can read more about the inquiry process and what kind of questions we can change. Some things we can address and vet and look at evidence. Some things we can't. So that, again, that's why the snapshot data is really important there. That's why I mentioned that. Some things are not necessarily addressable to be changed on the report card based on the data that you gave us in the previous year or years. So that's why the inquiry process, understanding that what's possible, what's not, is really important there. And then there are notification requirements for all public schools to post your report card and share your report card with your public community. So there's specifics on that in the notification requirements page there. Okay, that was a lot of stuff. We'll be here for questions afterwards. And you can ask any questions to reportcardhelp@dpi.wi.gov. But as for accountability in the state report card section, I think that is my spiel, and I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, everyone. I just want to ask a quick question before I share to make sure I'm sharing the right information. Is this group all brand new LEAs?
Yes, this will be
Great.
all new LEAs.
Okay, that helps. So go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm Lauren. I work on the assessment side, helping out with a lot of the assessments and also in charge of all of the communications. Let's just go ahead and skip this slide since this group will not have any assessment data coming in yet this year. So what I want to share first is our statewide assessment calendars for this year. There are two different versions. The first is a timeline of when each state assessment is administered. And the second one is a table by grade and time of year. So those should be good resources and helps planning out your assessment schedules for the next year. Another thing I want to mention is, and it's not on the slides and I'll add it here on the chat, is this time of year, we are starting to collect our district and assessment coordinator information, your district's DAC. And so those forms need to be completed and sent in to our office. I will add a link to those forms in this chat before I hop off today. And that will help in our team communicating with you and getting the DAC all the right information they need throughout the school year. One other thing I want to mention about communications is the DAC will automatically receive our weekly communication emails. If there is anyone else in the district who would also like to receive this communication, please go ahead and email me. I have a separate list that I will send out the DAC digest to in addition to the DAC. So if that's something of interest to you, please email me and I can add that person to the list. So one thing I want to mention in our world of assessment, I'll give you a quick overview. We have our access for ELLs that starts off in the fall. We're also doing a couple of different NAEP assessments, which you should have been notified if you are taking part of that. And then we have our spring assessments, the DLM, the forward, the ACT with writing. And then new this year, replacing the Aspire is our pre-ACT secure. And I just wanted to talk really briefly about what this new assessment entails. This is an online assessment. There are paper accommodations available for those students who need it. The great thing about this assessment, it is shorter than the Aspire. So you can see the Aspire was 285 minutes. This one is 155. Like the ACT with writing, this assessment students will take in that one sitting. So it's not like the Ford exam where they can do math one day, reading the next day, social studies the following day. It is predictive of the ACT score. And like the ACT with writing, it includes English, mathematics, reading, and science. However, there is no separate writing portion to this assessment. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The assessment time windows are very similar to the ACT. It'll be spring assessments. And the scoring, once again, is just like the ACT with writing, the 1 through the 36 with the maximum of 35. So this is a brand new assessment to everyone this year. I have included a link to the website at the bottom. We are continuing to get new information loaded onto the website, things like training manuals, other important resources that will be helpful. So please go ahead and check out that website, and it will be added to throughout this year with new information and resources. I just wanted to share a couple of resources for assessment I thought may be helpful. The first is our assessment correspondence. And this is where you will find all of our issues of the DAC Digest kept, and also any important assessment related emails. We do send out an ACT with writing email to districts. Sometimes that's once a week in the season of assessment. Sometimes that's once a month. Once in a while, we'll send out news flashes if we need to get really important information out there right away. So this is an archive of all of our communications. So if you want to go back and catch up on, we sent out a DAC Digest in June. We're getting ready to send out one actually this week. You can hop onto this website and take a look to see what's going on in the world of assessment. You can also go on just to our general assessment webpage. Within that webpage, you'll find all the different assessments. You'll find important dates, resources, anything you could want about each of those assessments. You can also find the contact person to reach if you have any questions about those assessments. And lastly, I just wanted to point out one of my main tasks is working on our strategic assessment system resources, and that's really focusing on making sure that we're thinking about summative, interim, and especially formative assessment with students, that we're taking a look at them as a whole and not just looking at that statewide assessment score when looking into their learning. And there's a lot of great resources available here listed for you to check out. We have an assessment and data literacy e-learning series that educators could complete on their own with an online e-learning system. There's also resources that could be done for a school-wide PD that may be really helpful. And the last one I want to point out is Ms. G's Year of Assessment. And this is an interactive tool that outlines what a strategic assessment system could look like at different grade levels and in different subject areas. So it walks educators or leaders through a teacher evaluating their students throughout the entire school year. It works in how you can incorporate the SLO into this process. So please take a look if you are wanting to learn more about what a strategic assessment system could look like. And with that, I will open it up for questions. I think we're a little beyond our time already.
Anyone have anything they want to ask while we have them all here? They will, of course, be available by email. I think you covered it so well that no one has any questions.
I'll add my email in case anyone would like to get on the DAC Digest email list. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, y'all.
Great.
Let's move on. Let's see if I can move us on. How do I do that? Boop, 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 boop. Oh, there we go. Here's some links. Okay, Britt, are you on the call?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so this is the interactive portion. So Sarah, this is your host platform. Can we change out? Do I need to stop sharing mine so Britt can share hers? Let's see. How do I even stop sharing? Here's a button that says stop sharing. I'm gonna press that.
It says my
Okay,
sharing is disabled.
let's see. Maybe I can do it. I apologize, everyone. Like I said, this is my second language, not my first.
It's probably my fault as well because I have the interactive portion that would have just been easier to do myself. So I apologize for.
No, it's fine. It's just that I have to learn more than one platform. I don't want to put you in the waiting room. That's not right. Does anyone who is more fluent in Zoom know how I can let Britt share her screen?
Oh, I can just make her a co-host too.
Oh, brilliant. Can we just do that?
Okay, she should be able to share now.
Okay, so let me just take a look, share screen. Okay, perfect. Here we go. Come on. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen and my slide deck.
I can.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So as Alex said, my name is Britt Miller. I am the WISE Reporting Relationship Manager on our customer service team. So I'm going to be giving a really brief overview of WISE Reporting and WISE Data Portal. There's a lot of information that goes into WISE Data and WISE Reporting, and unfortunately 30 minutes is just not long enough for that. So I'm just going to give a brief overview, but I do have some additional resources, and we do have a lot of other additional training tutorials and user groups and all of that that I will reference at the end. But I will just do my part here. So the first thing that's important with WISE reporting is making sure that you have access to the applications that you need. I believe I heard that this is majority new LEAs with new users. So just ensuring that you have your district administrator security set up at the DSA level. And then I'm assuming most of you do not currently have access to the application. So I'm going to kind of just share with you really briefly how to do that. The first part that's most important is if you are a Google district, a Google school or not. If you use enterprise Google accounts for your email access, this is going to be a little bit easier for you. When you go into the login screen, you're just going to use your school authentication process and to log into WISE Home to get your access set up, which is great. If you are not a Google school, you are going to need to create a WAMS ID. If some of those on the call are educators, you may already be familiar with WAMS since most of you do your licensing through that. However, this WAMS is going to be needed to set up through your district, your school email address for security purposes. So you may need to create a new one. So I just want to make that distinction right up front, because depending on how you log in, you may accidentally lock yourself out. So it's important to either use the Google or the WAMS and then continue to use one of those going forward. Now, for those of you that have not yet requested access or maybe need additional access, you're going to do majority of your work on the WISE homepage. So I did link this in the slideshow, which Alex said he will be sending out. But if you're not already familiar, this WISE homepage is going to be your homepage for all of your access to the application. So if you have not already, I highly recommend you bookmark this page, because this is going to be your kind of main hub for getting where you need to go. Now, if you need to request access, we do have instructions here for requesting access. So that is something that is handled at your school level. DPI does not provide or approve any access. So if you submit access, that is going to go to your administrators at your school. So just make sure you stay in connection with them when you're trying to get into any applications that you need. So this homepage has a lot of information that you'll need. And then I also linked in here, if you have other additional application needs, such as special education portal, WISE grants, anything like that, we do have a web page that has all of those user roles available, so you can decide which one best fits your need. And then when you submit your request, you have the appropriate user role requested as well. So that's really helpful. And the 3 applications that, if you are going to be using WISE data reporting, that you will need access to make your job a lot easier, is WISE ID, WISE data portal, and WISE Dash for districts. So the WISE ID application is an application that allows you to assign a unique identifier to students and staff for reporting. This is a 10-digit code that follows a student their entire K-12 career, and then if they become an educator themselves, they maintain that original code that they had when they were a student. So this is how we identify students in the WISE data system, is with this identifying code. It's unique to every student, so it's really important that every student is assigned their own code. Once they have a WISE ID, you can start reporting their information in WISE data portal. This is everything that you would enter into your student information system. So this is their demographic information, their attendance, their enrollment, programs, roster, all of that information gets funneled into WISE data associated to the student's WISE ID number. So again, really important that we get that WISE ID set up and that every student has their own individual number. And then lastly, I just want to mention WISE Dash for districts. It's an application that allows you to review the information that you're submitting before it's publicly reported. And there's a lot of information in there that comes in the format of graphs, and informational kind of visually, so that you at the school level can make informed decisions based on educational needs or your student learning enhancement. So it's another really great review tool. We're not going to go super far into WISE Dash, but if you don't already have access to WISE Dash, I highly encourage you to request that and then kind of take a look, because this is going to help you with the snapshot and public reporting part of your reporting process. Now, the data submission process, there's kind of 3 layers to it, and there's a visual graph that I'm going to go into right after this slide, but essentially you do your data entry at the school level in your local student information system. That data gets pushed to the WISE data portal, where we run it against a validation to make sure that what you're submitting is correct and complete, so that it can be publicly reported accurately. If there are any errors or warnings, those will show up in the portal. I'll open that in a minute and show you what that looks like. But it's basically a tool that helps you review the information for accuracy, allows you to make any corrections that need to be made before we do the reporting during the snapshot period. And then you can just make sure that you're monitoring that and everything is looking good. So again, here's that visual representation. So we have you at the LEA. So this is you, your data specialist, your person that's handling the data reporting. You're going to enter all of your student information system. You're going to enter all of your student information into your vendor tool, your student information system. That is going to get pushed to WISE Data EdFi. It's kind of like a holding cell where you push it in. And then once you run a validation, WISE Data will pull that information into our system and run it against our business logic. So this is where we're going to make sure that what you're reporting is accurate and complete. Oh, that went a little far. If there are any errors or warnings, they will show up in the WISE data portal. Again, I'm going to look at that with you in just a second, but this is where you're going to be able to monitor it and take a look to make sure that everything is looking good, and be able to edit or modify any of the information as needed. If any information does need to be corrected, you are going to do that in your student information system. You're going to make any corrections that are needed. You're going to re-push that to us, rerun the validation. And once everything looks good, It's going to go to our data warehouse, which is going to push into WISE Dash, which is where the data is publicly reported from during the snapshot. So this is just a visual representation of that process. It looks much more complicated than it is, I promise. Once you're familiar with it, it's quite easy to understand. And then just as an additional background, WISE Data Portal is open all year. So it is a continuous collection period. You can modify and correct the information in WISE Data from your SIS at any time during the school year. But as others have mentioned, we do have a snapshot period, which collects certain information that's relevant to certain dates. So when we talk about the third Friday of September, that is a date where we're looking at enrollment information, but that doesn't actually get collected until December. So you do have time between the third Friday of September and the December snapshot date to make sure that your data is looking clean before we actually take that for public reporting. The snapshot is just used as a window in time for us to look at your data as of that certain date, but WISE Data Portal is continuously collecting information. So it is good to go in there regularly and make sure you're monitoring it and taking a look at what's there. So now we are going to go into the WISE Data Portal. So again, we're on WISE Home. You really want to bookmark this page because this is where you're going to go in. So you would click this button right here. I already have mine open. This is what I was referring to with the Google sign-in or the WAMS sign-in. So if you're a Google district, you're going to want to use this side of the screen to log in. If you're not a Google district, you're going to want to use your WAMS. And this WAMS account, like I said, should be connected to your school email address, not a personal email. It's for security reasons. We want to make sure that if you're leaving the district, you're no longer accessing anything that was assigned to you that could be PII information. So we are going to log in with my test site and WAMS. And I do want to make a note that this is a test environment. This is not live data. So even though it says Sun Prairie up here, these are not actual Sun Prairie students. So the first time you log in, it is going to prompt you to complete a contact screen. This is going to be really important because this is some information that we use at DPI for our outreach, and then other schools will use when they're trying to clean up data that impacts students that you have, or you have reported information on students that they have. So the contact page is going to be really important. You're going to want to make sure that all of your information is correct and that you're indicating the data area that you work in. So if you're someone that works with enrollment information, you're going to want to indicate that you are the enrollment person, because you don't want someone that's trying to clean up special education information contacting you, because unfortunately that's not an area that you have any control over helping them resolve those issues. So it's really important that you complete that page, and you will be prompted the first time you log into WISE Data to do so. So just make sure that you focus on that and get that submitted correctly. And then once that's complete, this is going to be your landing page in WISE Data. This is our data quality page. Now, again, there's a lot of information in here, and I unfortunately don't have time to go through every single piece of it, but I am going to hit the high points, and then we have additional training that I'll reference at the end of my time for you to get additional information on the rest of the things that I don't talk about. So data quality page, pretty self-explanatory. This is just a visual representation of how your data is looking as of the last time the information was validated. So as you can see from this example here, we have some filter options up top. If you wanted to go back and look at any prior years, I don't think any of you have that ability right now because you're all new, but next year you'll be able to come in and review last year's information. If you have if you have more than one school part of your charter, you'd be able to access those here. If you just wanted to look at one particular school, you can filter that. The validation message summary, this is going to show you how many errors you have, how many warnings, and then the percentage of students with those errors and warnings. Ideally, you would never see 100. Again, this is test information, so there's a lot of errors, so we can kind of use it in these types of trainings. But ideally, this percentage would be quite low, but if you did have a high percentage here, that would be an indicator that there's something going on with your data flow that you would need to address. It could be something that has to be addressed on the SIS side. Maybe there's a bug that's throwing incorrect enrollment dates for all of your students, or it could be something that maybe the special education department pushed through something that maybe was sent prematurely or in error, and now your error and warning percentage has skyrocketed because that needs to be cleared up. It's just, again, a visual representation for you to kind of take note of what's going on with your data. There's some data quality indicators down here. Again, just another way for you to visually see what's going on. If we use this bar graph as an example, enrollments, you know, we only have 4 grade levels that have any enrollments currently submitted. If that doesn't look right to you, if you know you have more grades and there's no enrollments being reported, you know there's an issue with your enrollment data flow. So you would want to take a look at that. I'm going to jump into the validation messages screen. This is the screen where you are going to spend majority of your time in WISE data. This is the screen that's going to let you know if the data that you're pushing to us has any issues that need to be resolved. So again, we have the filter options up here, which is great. And then we have the actual validation messages themselves. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. We have 3 different validation messages that are important to note. We have the critical error, which is this red exclamation mark. This is letting you know that the data that you've provided under this category is not going to make it for public reporting. It's not going to make it to WISE Dash, and it's not going to be reported at all. So these are critical. They need to be resolved and prioritized when you're doing your data cleanup. The next one is a regular error, still an error, but it may go through to WISE Dash. It may end up being reported, but it's most likely not going to be reported the way that you want it to be reported. So again, not quite as critical as these ones, but still needs to be addressed because it still may be coming through incorrect, and we don't want that to be reported as incorrect for you. And then lastly, we have the orange yellow triangle. These are warnings. This is saying that what you've reported to us may not be wrong. It's just not what we would expect. So these are really just for you to review quickly and just say, yep, that makes sense. Or no, maybe I need to take a second look. The nice thing about warnings is this is the only kind of interactive part of WISE data. If you come in here and you look at this and you say, you know, you have this warning for no enrollments for this school in this school year, and you like, yep, you know what, we're not really using the JEDI virtual this year. It makes sense that we don't have any enrollments. You'd be able to come in here, you can click it and acknowledge. And once you hit submit, the JEDI school will disappear from this validation list. So that's kind of the only interactive portion of WISE data, but it's basically a way for you to let our system know that you have taken a look at this and what's being reported is correct, so that we can take it off of the list, and then you don't have to just keep looking at it over and over again. So those are the 3 different types of validation messages. Now we're going to talk about what the validation messages actually are and how we resolve them. So if we take a look at this one right here, it's a critical error, invalid enrollment. We want to know which students it's affecting. So I click this little box here, and it's showing me the 2 students that have this invalid enrollment. Primary flag is true, but the enrollment type is other. Well, what exactly does that mean? If you're not really sure, you can click the little icon here. It'll give you a longer description, a little bit more information, but if that still isn't quite making sense to you, we do have these Kbas. They're knowledge-based articles. So it's linked here and here. They'll take you to the same place, but it's basically going to take you to an article that's going to give you more information. So we're going to have that short text, that same long text, the business rule logic, if you kind of had a programmer that wanted to take a look at why it's flagging. And then we do give an example of how to fix it. Again, every SIS vendor is different, so we can't give specifics on go to this screen and change this field. Every vendor has that set up a little bit differently, but we do try to give you a general idea of this is flagged because of this reason, and here's how you would fix it. And then majority of them also have an example from District Deb. District Deb is great if you need a real world example on how to correct any of the information. District Deb can kind of walk you through her thought process as she tries to fix it on her side. And then we also have additional information relevant to that particular error or warning that you're trying to resolve. So you have a bit more information, you know how to fix it now. Let's take a look at this student. We want to see what their specific enrollment information looks like so we know what to fix. If we open this up, we're going to see this details button over here on the student line, and this is going to open the specific student detail information for that student. Now, this has a ton of information. As you can see, we've got a lot of different topic areas, but the nice thing about this is this little envelope is going to indicate where you have a data error that needs to be reviewed. Now, this particular student has a lot of these flags. Again, this is a testing student, so these are mostly throwing just for examples, but if we were just looking at the student's invalid enrollment, we would see that flag here. We would know the record is indicating that this record is the one that has an issue. And then we'd be able to kind of dig deep and go into all of their specific information to figure out how do we actually fix this and where does that correction need to be made. Once you figure out what needs to be fixed, what piece of information is missing from our side, you go back to your student information system, you make the correction there, and then you re-push that updated information to WISE data. Once you've made that push successfully, you're going to want to come and queue, import, and validate. Now, this is where I was saying you push the information from your student information system, you push it to this like EdFi house, and then WISE data validates whatever in the EdFi and pulls it into our student detail pages. This does get run automatically every night. So if you're working in your information and you want it to update and you push it over, but maybe it's the end of the day, you're not going to have time to come in here and look at anything extra for that day. No worries. We do this automatically every night around 5 o'clock. But if it's the morning and you are looking in here and you want to make some corrections, you're going to want to run a manual validation. And then once that completes, ideally, this student, if you fix the issue, this student will disappear off of this validation message list and they'll no longer be seen on here because their data has been corrected. So that's the goal with the validation messages. It's just a way for you to kind of see where our system is flagging issues for you to review. You then go and correct those issues in your student information system, resync that or re-push that to us, and then we ensure that it's all correct again so that we can flow it to WISE-4 public reporting. So that's kind of the very, very basic, simple process of WISE data. Again, there's a lot more information in here to share, but we do have additional trainings that will go more in depth in some of these other topics, which will be very helpful for you. But that is just kind of the very basic, simple overview of what's going on in WISE data. I do have some additional resources added in here. Alex is going to send these out after the session, so it would be great if you could take the time to look through some of these. They're all pretty self-explanatory. I do think you as new LEAs will get the most benefit out of the mini tutorials. If you're not familiar with how to do a WISE ID process, assigning those, then this is going to show you how to do that. If you have questions about, WISE data overview or certain specifics that have to do with certain topics, that will give you more information. The other one that I think is going to be really helpful is this WISE Data Annual Task Checklist. This is created to kind of go through the start of year tasks for schools. So we have the general preparation, making sure your school is set up in school directory, your dates are entered, your grade level placements are accurate, making sure that you have the access and WISE Secure that you need to the applications you need. Oops, sorry about that. When you're registering your students and reporting, what information should you be collecting? All of that demographic detailing is here. How to do the WISE ID upload, all of that. And then the other piece is that we also include, when we talk about the snapshots, there are different collections. So as new schools, you don't need to be concerned about the year-end collection right now because there is no year-end data for you from last year. But if you want to know specifically what's included in the third Friday of September, here are those data values that you need to be making sure are being entered and submitted correctly because this is what's part of that collection. Same thing with October 1 for special education. These are the values that are being collected specifically for October 1. So this is a really helpful webpage for you to come to just to kind of get an idea of what the start of the school year looks like, making sure that you're hitting all those boxes and what you should be preparing for snapshots. And then lastly, staying connected. We do have user group calls. Once the school year starts, we will have those every week. This is a great place for you to come and attend to get some DPI updates. If there's anything going on in our system that we want you to be aware of, any updates or bugs that are being fixed, any prominent issues that we've been hearing about that we want to address. You can also bring questions that you have. So if you have a particularly difficult question or an error that you can't quite figure out how to fix, this is a really great place for you to come and bring that question to the group at large, and we will have DPI experts on that can address that with you. There's also the Google community where you can connect with your peers. They can really help you, especially on the vendor side. If you have additional questions about how to submit something in your student information system that maybe we can't address with you because we're not familiar with that, you can always submit a help desk ticket and someone on the customer service team will address any questions or concerns you have with that. And then finally, we do have new user trainings that are happening once a month. It's the first Wednesday, I believe, of every month. We have a new user training with someone on the customer service team. It's an hour and a half. It's plenty of time for you to get a much more in-depth overview of the WISE data portal, all of those different tabs, all of those different features that can be used to help you with your data review process. And then there is additionally a Q&A session of that training as well. So if you do have any questions that come up either during the training or before that you'd like to be clarified, that can be done there as well. So I think I'm still in my time. Again, it's a lot of information to go over, so I apologize if I went a little fast or if I missed anything, but we are always available on the customer service team for any additional support that you need. Just let us know, and we are more than happy to help.
Okay, thank you, Britt. Any questions for Britt while she's still here? That sounds like a no. Okay, I know that our next presenters are here to talk about Mckinney-Vento, but the rest of the PEO team has informed me that they're going to revolt if we do not take a quick break. So even though The Godfather Part 2 did not have an intermission, we are going to have a quick 5-minute break and come back at 10:37. I apologize that I did not schedule this in to begin with. I was just so eager to talk about all of the stuff that goes into being an LEA that I was running straight through it. But we do need a break, and let's take a 5-minute break and come back at 10:37. Does that sound okay with everyone? No one is telling me no, so let's do that, and we will come back at 10:37.
do you want me to screen share or do you want to do it to go through the slides?
I had such a terrible time getting it to screen share with Britt that I think it may be easier just for you to tell me when to click through.
Okay,
If that's
sounds
okay.
good. Yep.
Okay, it is 10:37. I think we can get rocking and rolling. Again, I appreciate you bearing with me for our unscheduled break, should have been scheduled. And thank you for your patience to Clara and Christine for rolling with the punches. So this is a presentation that I'm really excited about because we didn't do it last year and I really think it should have been done. And I'm excited that they're here to discuss it. So I will pass it over to Christine to talk about Mckinney-Vento.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christine Nadalski. I am a consultant at the Department of Public Instruction and more specifically the state coordinator for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program, which works with the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And I'm going to let my colleague introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clara Pfeiffer. I'm a grant specialist that works with the EHCY program and does the monitoring under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act.
Next slide. Sorry, there's a whole lot of transitions apparently.
Everyone, there we go.
Oh my gosh. So we're here to talk about McKinney-Vento. It's a federal law. And then the LEA responsibilities under McKinney-Vento. So it is part of a federal education law. It was reauthorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, in 2015. So all LEAs are required to be in compliance with McKinney-Vento, and it's about supporting students experiencing homelessness in public schools. And McKinney-Vento works hand in hand with other federal education laws, so with IDEA, Title I, and any other federal education programs that exist. So all LEAs are required by the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act to do these things. And we're going to get into some of them a little bit more. We don't have a ton of time today. This is kind of just the bare bones information for all of you. The most important piece is to designate a homeless liaison. So every LEA must have a homeless liaison identified within the LEA. And we'll get into what the role of that person would be. And it's actually required for all LEAs to provide DPI that information of who that designated person is in the school directory application. Because we are required as DPI, as the state, by the federal law to post that information so homeless liaisons can get in contact with each other, things like that. So Mckinney-Vento also requires LEAs to identify and immediately enroll any child or youth experiencing homelessness at any grade, continue the child or youth in their school of origin, inform parents or guardians of the educational rights of their children under Mckinney-Vento, provide transportation to and from the school of origin, ensure no barriers exist for full educational participation, and then develop partnerships with community agencies, and really that's around referring families to any sort of services they might need in the community. And we'll get more into all of these. Next slide. So we did want to provide some context around homelessness and what that looks like in Wisconsin. So in the 1920 school year, as a state as a whole, there were 17,179 students that were identified as experiencing homelessness that year. And you can see that's a decrease from the 1819 year. And then of course in 2020, 21, you know, the height of the pandemic school year when a lot of schools weren't open for in-person instruction, there's a huge decrease. So we know that COVID has played a role in decreasing numbers because it's been harder for districts to connect with students, connect with families, really understand their living situations and what's going on. So we've seen a decrease so far for the 2021-22 school year, just this last school year. The numbers have gone back up, and we expected that to happen. We expected the decrease, but generally the last 10 years have been around 2% of our total student population in Wisconsin schools have been experiencing homelessness.
So we'll go into a little bit of the causes of homelessness. Many of you probably already know some of these things. And like Christine just mentioned, and we have at the bottom, COVID-19 has played a role in this, but even prior to COVID-19 and virtual learning and everything else, there were clearly issues, as you just saw in our data, of homelessness in the state. So some of the causes of this could be, and this is persistent, I would say, around the state as well, the lack of affordable housing, also poverty, health issues, domestic violence, natural and other disasters, other types of abuse, neglect, or family dysfunction. And we'll see a little bit more when we go into the definition of homelessness, how some of these things play a part in causing homelessness in a family or in young children. Next slide, thank you. So here we have the definition of homelessness under Mckinney-Vento. So just a note that this is a slightly different definition than some other federal agencies have, but this is the definition that will exist for the U.S. Department of Education. So this is that homeless children and youth are children who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So what exactly is fixed, regular, and adequate? We will talk about that on the next slide. So fixed, this would mean something that is stationary, permanent. It's not going to change. Regular is that you can go there on a routine basis. It's not something that you might be couch surfing. It's not that you have no idea if you can go there each night. And adequate. This has some different meanings, I would say, or it's a little subjective, but essentially a place that is sufficient, meaning that there's proper heat, for example, there's water, something that would be meeting the physical and psychological needs in a typical home environment. So the bottom line is that can a student go to the same place every night to sleep in a safe and sufficient space? So we'll go a little bit into the role of the homeless liaison. So under ESSA, there were some requirements created for the capacity training and duties of a McKinney-Vento liaison in any LEA. So every LEA must designate a homeless liaison under the McKinney-Vento Act. So whoever a district or an LEA designates, there has to be an ability to carry out these duties. And just to note that that doesn't mean that all of these duties must be done by the homeless liaison. It just means that the homeless liaison must ensure that the LEA is doing these things. So I won't go into all of these, and it looks like the slides have cut off a little bit. But essentially, it's very important that children and youth that are homeless under McKinney-Vento are identified, enrolled in, and have a full opportunity to succeed in school and receive all of the other services that any other student would be receiving in the LEA. Another very important piece is to ensure that parents or other homeless youth are given their rights under McKinney-Vento, and also are invited to participate in their childhood education. Liaisons must ensure that data is submitted and collected. This is required in your student information system. It's required to be submitted to DPI. That is where we get the data, such as the data that we showed you in the graph earlier. All LEA staff must receive some type of professional development and support on McKinney-Vento. So training is important, making sure the staff know that that definition of homelessness and what types of services a homeless student would need to receive under McKinney-Vento, for example. You can go to the next slide. Continuing with this, many of these things are requirements. Well, all of these things are requirements under McKinney-Vento. So also ensuring that families are informed of their rights, but one of their rights is transportation related. We'll go into that a little further. That disputes regarding eligibility, school selection, or enrollment are resolved or mediated. On unaccompanied youth, which we also will go into a little bit, are enrolled in school, and there are procedures that are in place to ensure that they are receiving full credit for past courses, and also working on if a student is able to receive partial credit for coursework that may have been completed elsewhere. So this part is slightly new, making sure that partial credits are taken into place when, especially for high school, this would be for high school age students typically, to ensure that they have enough credits to graduate. And then it is another requirement that all homeless liaisons must participate in any kind of required professional development that is asked of them by us, by Christine, by DPI. So this this looks different in different states, but for us, this typically looks like being asked to complete some modules that we have created over the past few years. We also have a lot of other professional development opportunities that are not requirements, but we have quarterly webinars, and we have other opportunities for homeless liaisons around the state to network with each other. We have a monthly meeting for that as well. You can go to the next slide. So these are just a few of the resources that we wanted to highlight for learning a little bit more about the role of the homeless liaison. We do have a webinar that we conducted 1 or 2 years ago that is specific, that goes more into detail on this exact topic. So that is on our training page. There's also a link to just our regular training page that has many other webinars and other resources like the modules that I just referred to. There's also a liaison toolkit. So this would be very useful for any kind of new homeless liaison. This is provided through one of our national partners, the National Center for Homeless Education. And then through another national partner, Schoolhouse Connection, we have a different resource here as well that is designed to assess the capacity of a homeless liaison, helping you determine whether that person is the right person in the school or the district to have that role. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we do want to talk more in depth about Mckinney-Vento then as well, and some of the pieces that are required under it. So when we look at eligibility, Clara had talked earlier about being if a living situation is fixed, regular, adequate. There are specific situations that are listed in the law as that would be considered homeless. So sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason. And this is referred to as doubled up. So it typically looks like a family living with a relative or a family living with another family friend, something like that. It could be an older youth living with a friend's parents, something like that. And so this is about 75% of our families experiencing homelessness, or our students experiencing homelessness, live in a situation like this. Living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, campgrounds due to lack of adequate alternative accommodations is homeless. Any emergency shelter, transitional shelter, kind of what you think about as a typical homeless shelter situation. And then really living anywhere that's not designed for ordinary use. So if a family is living in their car, if someone's staying in substandard or an abandoned building or housing, something like that. And then just to note that children from migratory families who qualify as homeless or are living in one of those situations can qualify. They have to be living in one of the situations above, but just because they're migratory doesn't mean they're not homeless. And the same with unaccompanied youth who are living in any of those situations. Next slide. So an unaccompanied homeless youth is a youth who meets one of those criteria for experiencing homelessness and are also not in the physical custody of a parent or a legal guardian. And so again, this is kind of that situation. Maybe it's a youth that's living with a friend's parents. Maybe they're bouncing from house to house, couch surfing. It could be a young student who is living in an emergency basis with their grandmother. But anything that's not kind of planned, and a youth is not in the physical custody of their parent or legal guardian, would also mean that they're unaccompanied. Okay, so under Mckinney-Vento, each LEA shall, according to the student's best interest, continue attending their school of origin. And that includes for the duration of homelessness and until the end of the academic year if a student does become permanently housed during the school year. It's presumed that staying in their school of origin is in their best interest. We know transitions for children and youth multiple times in a year can be really difficult. There's loss of learning that happens. So really keeping that education stable for the child or youth is presumed to be in their best interest. If it's not feasible to do so, so maybe there's a, moving from one side of the country to the other, moving from one side of the state to the other, and it's just not feasible to keep them in their school of origin, then the student has the right to immediately enroll in their resident LEA. And so we did give the definition of school of origin. It's the school the youth the child youth attended when they were last permanently housed or the school where they were last enrolled. And so again, it's really just keeping that stability for the student. That's the intent of the law. Next slide. So I did talk about that. The other thing to consider when determining best interests and which school really makes sense for the student is to consider student-centered factors. So is mobility of the student going to affect their education? You know, is it going to affect their health and safety? So if a student, you know, a move that a half an hour away might look different for a high school student versus a kindergartner. And so just really looking at all factors around the student and kind of determining what's in their best interest. And then give priority to the parent, guardians, or the unaccompanied youth's wishes, and really find out, you know, do you want to remain in your school of origin? Do you want to, and this would be like if you have a student in your LEA, do you want to remain here? Does it make more sense to enroll where you're residing? And just be really considering those student-centered factors. So transportation is required under Mckinney-Vento to and from the school of origin. So if a student and a family do say, we do want to stay in our school of origin, then the LEA must provide transportation for that student. And again, this also includes until the end of the year if a student obtains permanent housing. So if transportation is a barrier for the family, for the student to get to school, transportation must be provided. And it must be provided even if transportation is not provided to other students, because it's under the federal law, transportation to and from the school of origin must be provided. If transportation is provided to all other students, you can look at comparable transportation of what makes sense. Do we need to just reroute a bus to pick up the student over here instead of over there? But if a student moves a larger distance, it might need to be some sort of special transportation. So the charter school must provide transportation for a student to remain in that school as their school of origin. And then what the law says is that if a student moves between district boundaries or LEA boundaries, both of those LEAs must share the responsibility and share the cost of transportation. So really how that looks with an independent charter school is that if you're their school of origin and they move, they become homeless and move to a different location, that responsibility and sharing of the cost is going to be with that LEA where they are then residing. So it could be the same LEA they were already living in, but they are now in a homeless situation. That's okay. Or it could be a different LEA. But really then there needs to be the homeless liaison's responsibility would be to communicate with that other LEA, reach out to that other homeless liaison, and then talk about how that responsibility and cost is going to be shared. Another requirement under Mckinney-Vento is immediate enrollment. So this would be for a student who it's not feasible to remain in their school of origin, or it's not in their best interest to remain in their school of origin. And this is going to look a little bit different for independent charter schools than LEAs with boundaries. So how we want to frame this for all of you is for families and students that are seeking enrollment into your LEA and they're experiencing homelessness. What the law says is that immediate enrollment is required even if students don't have required documents that might be needed typically. So school records, immunization records, proof of residency, anything like that is not required. What the law also says is that Mckinney-Vento requires immediate enrollment even if students have missed application or enrollment deadlines during any period of homelessness. So what that really means for your schools is that if enrollment is full, you certainly do not have to go above and beyond your max capacity because there's a student or family experiencing homelessness that now wants to enroll. what should be done is giving priority to that student. So if there's a wait list, looking at your policies around bumping them up to the top of the wait list. But we would never expect any LEA to go above their capacity for enrollment for a student experiencing homelessness if you're at capacity. To have to hire another teacher or figure out another classroom, like none of that is required, but give priority to that student. Also be flexible on enrolling new students, even if it's past an existing deadline. If you do have space, welcome them in. And just know that those families may not have known about the deadline, or they may have missed it because they were in crisis. And then looking at revising enrollment policies, if your policies do present a barrier to families experiencing homelessness trying to enroll.
Okay, so there's a number of other laws or programs that LEAs must coordinate with that are related to students experiencing homelessness. So one of these things is that all students who are identified as homeless under Mckinney-Vento are automatically eligible for free school meals. And then these other programs listed here. So special education services, so that would be under IDEA, and then also Title I-A. These are other federal programs that do have rules pertaining to students experiencing homelessness. So for example, IDEA must be followed for all students experiencing homelessness, and services need to be coordinated. Also, the Title I-A homeless reservation is required. That is just a reservation that needs to be taken to support students experiencing homelessness if the LEA does end up identifying any students during the year. That reservation out of that Title I-A budget can be used for a large number of things that support students experiencing homelessness, which could include school supplies or a fee for getting glasses for a student, or if they need winter boots or a coat, or if you need to pay for gas cards for a family to transport themselves. There's a huge list of allowability there. And then just a really important note here, information about Mckinney-Vento students' living situation is a student education record subject to FERPA. So you cannot disclose this living situation unless you are given permission to. That also would be, this is something that's on a need to know basis for other teachers or other staff in the district or the school. So this would not be something that you would want to inform all staff about, just people who really need to know. So maybe that is that student's primary teacher, or that student's primary teacher and school nutrition, or and the counselor or other people services staff. So yeah. Okay, next slide, please. And these are just the rest of we did mention some of these resources. The first one here is our website. This is the link to our just homepage. We do have, again, that link that specifically goes to our training resources page as well. But this is the link directly to the module that I referred to earlier. This is what we call our 101 module, which takes about 20 to 25 minutes to complete, but it's very thorough and helpful. It does go through a couple of different scenarios to help you understand how homelessness looks different for different students. And then at the end, you can put in your information and kind of get a certificate of completion. That gets sent to DPI. So if you want to kind of confirm that you completed that, or if you want to ask certain staff to complete this, they also get a certificate of completion at the end of that. So you could send it to a principal or another supervisor, and so on. And then these are two of our national partners that were mentioned earlier, Schoolhouse Connection and the National Center for Homeless Education. There's a ton of great resources they have, along with all of the resources that we have on our DPI page as well. Another thing about our DPI page is we have a ton of example documents and forms. So if you're ever looking for anything you think you don't have, this will range anywhere from a sample brochure or a sample poster to hang up or to give to a family, to sample policies, sample documents, such as questions for like enrollment staff or pupil services staff to ask families that are sensitive, that are helpful in determining what families need and if their situation is considered homeless and so on. So take a look at that page as well. And then our last slide is just finally, if you have any questions, please contact us, Christine or Clara. We are happy to answer any questions that you might have. If you have specific questions about students who you're not quite sure if they're experiencing homelessness or not, please contact us. And again, if you're looking for anything specific, always give us an email. That's the best way to reach us.
And as Clara mentioned, we do offer lots of training opportunities and connection with other homeless liaisons throughout the year. So we do, once all of the homeless liaison contact information, or on an ongoing basis, as that's updated in every LEA school directory, we pull that information. We use that as our contact list. So we will be emailing throughout the year. We also send out some newsletters every once in a while, but we have more in-depth training opportunities that are offered. And we're also going to be having a conference in October, specifically for homeless liaisons and other staff that might be supporting students experiencing homelessness. So there are lots of more in-depth training opportunities.
Does anyone have any questions right now while we have them here? Nope. Okay. Christine and Clara, thank you so much for hopping on. I appreciate your time and your patience and understanding. And everyone, I will send you their slides when this is all over.
Thanks
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have our English learner policies. Amy or Tanya, are you on the call?
Yep. This is Amy.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Hey, Amy. Okay, so how we've been doing this is we've got your slides here. You just let me know when you want me to click through them, and I'm pretty good at reading context clues, but if I jump ahead, tell me to go back. Does that work?
Sure. Sounds great.
Brilliant.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
let's get rocking and rolling.
All right. Well, I'm going to start us off.
Oh, wait, this is not the right slide.
Oh,
Oh, goodness. Hold on. That's because I've jumped too far ahead and I put them in the order that they were originally in, and then I moved everyone around. Right? That sounds right. That sounds like something I did. This is a preview for everyone, Ryan's slides. So you have this to look forward to. And we'll click through them. All of them. How about this? This looks right. Okay, sorry about that, y'all.
that is correct. Yes. So, hello, everybody. My name is Tanya Morin, and I'm here with my colleague, Amy Michelik, to talk to you today about English learners. Can you go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so I will let Amy introduce herself.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Amy Michelik. I am Multilingual Learners and Title III. So the consultant for those pieces.
Yep. And I do multilingual, multicultural education, or dual language education, bilingual, bicultural, state aid
program. So we'll get more into what all that means later. We also wanted to let you know there's one other person that we work closely with related to English learner issues, and that is Jesse Roberts, who oversees assessments of English learners. So the access testing that districts are required to do of their English learners on an annual basis. So if you do have English learner students enrolled in your school, you will also be dealing with Jesse, and he's also someone who can help answer questions you might have about that testing process. All right, so next slide. Oh, I did want to say feel free to put questions in the chat. Otherwise, we do have a slide at the end for questions. So we're going to start by talking about who is an English learner. So some of you might have heard that term before. You might have heard other terms such as ELL, multilingual learner, emerging bilingual. For the purpose of this session, we will use the term English learner, or an EL for short. Sometimes people say L. And what you see on the screen here is the official kind of legal definition of what an English learner is. So as you can see, it's someone between the ages of 3 and 21 who's enrolled or preparing to enroll in an elementary or secondary school, and they were either born outside of the United States or have a native language that is other than English. And in addition to that, because we know that there are, kids who grow up speaking 2 languages, to be classified as an English learner, there also has to be an impact in their level of English language proficiency has to impact their speaking, reading, writing, or understanding of English, their ability to meet the grade level benchmarks on state tests, to achieve in classrooms where the language of instruction is English, and to participate fully in society. So basically, their English language proficiency level is impacting sort of their ability to access academic content and ultimately to be able to participate fully in the United States as a primarily English-speaking society, knowing that there are lots of other languages spoken, but in order to kind of the official language, of course, is English. So, all right. So next slide, please. So what you see now is just a little information about who English learners are in Wisconsin. So we have about almost 50,000 students who are classified as ELs based on the 21-22 data in the state. The top language is Spanish, but also there are many students who speak Hmong, Arabic, Chinese, or Somali. And these students are really spread throughout the state. So you have kids who are in some of our larger urban districts, even suburban districts, and even smaller rural communities. You will find significant populations of English learners. But even if your school only has one English learner enrolled in it, you still are have to abide by certain legal requirements in identifying and serving those kids. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So next slide. All right. So here is a list of some acronyms. I think probably when you're done with this presentation, will have heard a lot of different acronyms related to a lot of different pieces of the public education system. So we do love our acronyms, but here are some that are particular to English learners. So as I talked about, EL stands for an English learner. You might have heard also ELL, which was English language learner, and for a long time that was the accepted term. It's now considered dated or outdated, and really the preferred term is English learner. One term that we don't have up here, but that is still in state law and was the official term for many years at the federal level, is Limited English Proficient Student, or LEP student. The field has moved away from using that term because it is very much of like a deficit orientation of looking at those kids. Another term that you'll hear used a lot is multilingual learner, and that really is meant to focus on the assets that those kids are bringing. So it's not just that they don't speak English and are in a position of learning English, but it's recognizing the fact that, hey, they actually speak one or more other languages in addition to English that they're bringing, and they're adding English onto that. Another important term that you'll hear is bilingual bicultural, and this is really specific to Wisconsin. There's a state law about bilingual bicultural programming that we will often abbreviate to BLBC, and I'll talk more about that later. ELP refers to English language proficiency, and that is a student's level of English language proficiency, and students are tested and are given an ELP level of between 1 and 7. 7 would mean that they're not an English learner. 6 is if they were classified as an English learner and are later exited. And so then a level 1 through 5 is really a kid who is designated as an English learner and falls under all of these requirements that we'll be talking about. And LIEP refers to a language instruction educational program. So basically the way that the school is going to address the needs of English learner students, ensuring that they have access to their curriculum and are acquiring English. The access test is the annual English language proficiency test that is given in Wisconsin, and that if you have English learners, you will be required to use. The home language survey, Amy's going to speak more about this, is a way for schools to identify potential ELs. The screener is the initial, when you have kids come in, you would give them the screener to identify whether or not they are English learners. And exiting is when an English learner reaches native-like proficiency in English and is no longer served in an LIEP. So when they reach that level 6, they would be considered exited from the English learner program, or they no longer be considered an EL. And the LIE crosswalk, which we'll talk about more, is a document that we have created at DPI that goes over the different LIEPs, or language instruction educational program types. And shows you how to kind of code them when you're reporting data on English learners. All right, so now I'm going to pass it over to Amy.
All right. So my intention with this slide is to kind of give you a quick overview of some of the key laws that impact English learners. So what you see here are just some of the core federal laws or the cases which govern how districts have to support students. So first is, well, they're a little bit out of order from what I'm going to speak, but first, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The ESEA contained the first kind of federal language defining equal access to education as a civil rights issue. So the definition of an English learner, which was shared with you just prior, Tanya shared with you just prior, comes from Title III of this act. So like we also have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I'm seeing that I don't have that listed on the slide, but I think it's pretty important. Within the Civil Rights Act, there are provisions against non-discrimination with no qualification based on age. While more frequently talked about in the context of racial discrimination between adults, the provision of the Civil Rights Act cover individuals of all ages, which includes both employees of school districts and the students that are residing in that district. So keeping in mind students includes English learners. The Equal Education Opportunities Act primarily focused on ending school segregation, but it also contains requirements to serve and support ELs, in that it prohibits the denial of equal education opportunities due to the failure of an educational agency to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by students in instructional programs. And then going back to the top, Lau versus Nichols, this is really the landmark case that is what requires us to have English learner programs in schools today. So this kind of supports the idea that English learners need to make progress towards English proficiency in order to provide them access to the standard educational program. Castaneda versus Picard, this is really another landmark court case which requires districts to demonstrate that the program that they have is effective in serving English learners. So under this case law, the program must be based on, it outlines that the program must be based on sound educational theory. It must be implemented effectively with sufficient staff and resources, and it has to be evaluated regularly to determine that it is being effective in meeting their needs. Another thing I would highlight too is that U.S. Department of Ed also they publish a lot of fact sheets that speak to kind of the civil rights obligations. There is one fact sheet that specifically outlines that a district's obligation to communicate meaningfully with limited English proficient caregivers in a language that they can understand. Plyler versus Doe is a case that really basically says that you cannot really ask families of their immigration status when they're coming to the district, and they can't be denied access to school based on that immigration status. So again, this list isn't really exhaustive, but these are kind of the high level cases that would be included in that for English learners in terms of the laws that govern services that you would be required to provide to them. So next slide, please. All right, so as part of ESEA, states are required to have a standardized way of identifying those students. The slide represents kind of those entrance procedures. So in the standardized way of identifying those students who language may present a barrier to academic success, this is usually kind of a two-step process. So in order to accurately and efficiently identify students who are potential English learners, districts are required to administer what's called the Home Language Survey, or affectionately we say the HLS. This survey would go to all newly enrolled students. It's important that it is part of your initial enrollment package for every student that enters the district, and not just those students who you think may be English learners. This is required to go to every student upon initial enrollment. And the survey should only be given one time, and it must be provided to parents in a language that they can understand. So once the home language survey indicates, the family would fill this out. Once the home language survey indicates a positive result, that student would then have their language assessed through the WIDA screener for that final determination. And so if you want a better view of this, I'm not going to go into every single little micro detail of this entrance procedure, but our EL policy handbook, chapters 1 through 3, really does an extensive job of covering this process.
Can I just chime in real quick and
Sure.
and remind everyone that since you all are new districts, that every student, even if they attend a school that's in your network but is in a different LEA, is going to be new to you. So you should be giving this to every student who walks in the door this year, because you're your own districts this year.
Okay. And I think I might mention too, if you have students that are coming from other districts, you may want to investigate through their CUME files if they already have this identification. So that might be another additional step you may want to find out. If I'm understanding what you just said correctly, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, well, I'd say it because we have schools on here that that they have one school that's their own LEA and another school that's under a traditional district. And so if you have any students that were in 8th grade, for instance, with the traditional district and are now going to your independent charter school, this particular school straddles 2 different authorizers, 2 different ways of doing charters. And so you would just have to make sure you cover your bases, is what I'm getting at.
Sure. If they do come from an existing place, you will want to make sure that you check into whether or not they already have this identification. Most LEAs, outside of this, if they're coming, they would want to or they would probably have procedures in place for this already. So you will want to double check that and make sure that you do have any new students that are coming to you, that they either have an existing identification or they may require a new identification from you. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this is kind of what the home language, it's the first page of the home language survey as a screenshot. The home language survey also includes questions to assist districts in knowing the language needs of caregivers. It outlines kind of the language spoken in the home. So you should keep a record of which parents may need that language assistance or any kind of translation or interpretation services. So again, the home language survey does serve this purpose. You can see kind of, if you look at the screenshot on the bottom, it does outline those needs of the parent, because you do, again, like I had kind of mentioned before, you are under obligation to provide language assistance to the caregivers. So it's a good thing to keep in mind that this document serves as a means of collecting that information so that you can supply that to your teachers, or, you know, have a process or a procedure in place to do so, right? Let's see. Okay, one thing I do also want to highlight just for you, if you do go to our English Learner Policy Handbook page, we do now provide translations of our big main language groups in the state. We do provide translations. So if you do find that you have someone coming to your school that does need this language assistance and is required to take the home language survey, you could take this home language survey, one of our translations, off of our page on our EL Policy Handbook page. So those are available for you. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so it's important to understand that once an LEA has identified their English learners, a district has to provide effective programming for those students by demonstrating that students are growing both academically and in their English language proficiency. So the program has to demonstrate that it's overcoming the barriers to student success. So programming must, again, I kind of said this earlier, programming must be based on sound theory, and acknowledged by professionals in the field. It has to be effective in practice. It should have sufficient staffing and resources, and assessed regularly and continually improved. So just keep that in mind. You are under an obligation to prove that the services that you are giving to English learners are indeed effective. So next slide, please. Okay. To support districts in selecting those effective programs, the program types that are based on sound theory, the DPI has built a language instruction education program crosswalk. And we also have an accompanying flowcharts that kind of support districts in making an important decision on what program model might be a best fit for you. So please know that this crosswalk is going. We had one previously, we have now updated this and revised it. So know that this new crosswalk is going into effect for the 22-23 school year, which is next year. And you can find this crosswalk at the bottom of the English Language Development Standards page at the DPI website, which I think my colleague is linking in the chat for you. So more information will definitely be coming out over the next couple of months and over the school year, because this is a new crosswalk that has just now recently been aligned to your school system. So keep that in mind. If you want any more information about language instruction programming and placement in programming, that's covered in Chapter 3 of our DPI handbook, but also the crosswalk offers information and descriptions on what those programs look like. At any time, of course, if you're kind of trying to figure out what this really means, you're welcome to reach out to us, and we're happy to walk you through these program types, help you kind of figure this out. And if you're really looking for some good, support, just let us know. We're happy to help you with that. Next slide, please. So once a student is identified as an English learner, that student must be assessed annually for language proficiency. So this would include the year in which they were initially screened. So if you give a home language survey, the student would take the screener, but in that first year, they would also have to still be annually assessed. And then every other year, you don't have to screen them again, you only have to assess them for annual proficiency. So just remember that the screener is only used for identification, but then in that same year, they would be annually assessed. And then every subsequent year, they would take the actual official assessment again. Okay. There is no current opt-out for that annual assessment. Unfortunately, the parents do not really have that option to opt out of the assessment. So just keep that in mind that a student once identified as an English learner must take access for ELS every single year. And even when you offer, well, caregivers also, like parents, have the right to refuse any services that you would offer them through your language instruction program. But even if a caregiver decides that they do not want their student participating in your language instruction program, the student must still be assessed, because even without participating, they're essentially could refuse participation in your language program, but they also you are under obligation to still meet their needs or overcome any language barriers. So if they were identified through the screener that their English is not proficient, then you would have to take action to still meet their needs. And that could be through differentiation, but they would not be served in your program. So that is, a parent has a right to, like I said, refuse your services through the program, but you are still under obligation to assure that they are making their gains towards language proficiency, as well as, that growth in academics. So the testing window for the annual assessment is typically December and January, and then the results usually come back sometime in April. So keep that in mind. This is definitely something that you would want to reach out to Jesse Roberts for. He handles all things access. I mean, you could really talk to any of us, but Jesse Roberts is kind of the guru, the jack of all trades when it comes to access for English learners as well as screeners. So just to get you to the right and most appropriate person, Jesse Roberts handles all the assessment stuff for English learners. So just to keep that in mind. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so again, part of ESEA, we are required to have that standardized entrance as well as exit. So once a student is identified, they go through your program, they're doing really awesome because you guys are just instructionally great. So then you're watching this access data. So when it comes back in April, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to look at their access results, and anybody who meets a composite score of 5 must exit programming. All right. So you'll find those kids that are a composite score of 5, and then you'll look, and probably your next step would look to see if you have any students who kind of fall in between that 4.5 and a 4.9. So a composite score on access of 4.5 or 4.9 means that you have kind of that little space to determine whether or not you really think that language is a barrier for that student. So what you would then want to do is you would want to look at our chapter 14, 15, and 15, chapter 15, and there's some subchapters to that. And then you would want to do what's called a MIP. That stands for Multiple Indicator Protocol. And what this is basically a standardized tool for collecting evidence of a student's language proficiency in the classroom. So like you find the student, they score a let's say they score a 4.7, which is right in that range. And you're seeing that they're super successful on all their academic assessments. And, you're looking at their language proficiency assessment. You may see that maybe their writing score was just a little bit low. That's okay. But you think this student is ready to really not be in programming anymore. It's again about finding kind of that sweet spot of when students are proficient. So you would have an option to be able to do like a MIP observation, or if you had a portfolio collection, this would be outlined in your own procedures, to maybe exit that student just a little bit early. So this would allow you to do so. So that gives you a little bit of discretion in terms of, making a good choice for the students that are in front of you. After a student then is exited, you're under obligation to monitor that student for 2 years. And we monitor students basically to make sure that there aren't any more barriers to their education, to that academic success, right? So you're monitoring kids to make sure that language doesn't present any more challenges to any kind of academic success moving forward. And you will also in this period want to make sure that you're addressing any kind of gaps that are left, like for that student, that example that I had just given you, the 4.7, maybe their writing score was still not quite proficient. Maybe you want to do a little supplemental stuff to kind of support that writing to bring them a little bit further, but that is your discretion. So you want to just monitor them, make sure they're still proven successful. So, okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was kind of a challenge for me to include this slide, only because there are so many data reporting requirements for English learners. So I picked out kind of the 4 primary ones that I thought were the most important to kind of share with you today. Like I said, the list is long. So I would refer you to our data page. I did link the data elements page in this slide, which you can see highlighted at the beginning. One thing you may want to do is recognize who your immigrant children are. We do have the Immigrant Children and Youth website, which defines how you can figure out what an immigrant child is. And this is usually a student who is aged 3 through 21. They're not born in the United States. They have not attended school in the US for more than 3 years. So if you have students that meet that definition of an immigrant student, and again, you cannot ask a family of their immigration status, but if they meet that definition, if they fall in that age range, and they were not born in the US and they haven't attended school for more than 3 years, they are an immigrant student, and you should indicate that in your school system. This opens up for you the potential for applying for immigrant children and youth grant funds. So it's very important that you have this, because this will open up an opportunity for money for you to be able to apply. If you have a certain growth in immigrant students, there are criteria for this, but this could potentially allow you to apply for additional grant money to support students who really may need a little bit extra, right? We also collect languages spoken. So from the home language survey, and much of this information can come from the home language survey or in your enrollment forms, but on the languages spoken, or on the home language survey, families will write down languages spoken in the home. So this would be also entered into your school sys, and you would have to provide that information. Keep in mind that English cannot be the language identified for this, because we're looking for kids where other languages are presenting the barrier. So it is very possible you do have an English learner who is at home speaking both English and another language, but you do not want to report English. You do want to report the other language of influence if they are identified as an English learner. English language proficiency levels. This is another thing that we collect in a school sys. When you screen a student, this is when you will initially put this in your school system. So like you screen a system you screen a student that will present a score. Now the screener score is a little bit different than the access score. The screener score usually goes in increments of 0.5. So a student may be a level 2 or a level 2.5 or a level 3 or a level 3.5. The access score doesn't do that. The access for L's, like the annual assessment, does not do that. You would truncate that and you would report what that first number is. So if it's 2.5, you would report a 2. So if it's a 3.5, you would report a 3. If it's a 4, if you get a 4.0, it would still be 4. 4.5 would still be 4. So that would be the identification that you would give for the language proficiency level for the screener. For a student who is taking the annual assessment, it does not matter what that point is. Like, so if they scored a 3.8, for example, they would still be reported as a I just forgot what I said. Did I say 4.8 or 3? If they were a 3, I'll just start over. If they scored a 3.8 composite, you would report them as a 3. It is always like that primary composite number. It's truncated. So the point factor is not rounded up. It's not rounded down or anything like that. It's just the main score. So a composite score of a 2.6 would be just a 2. So that would be what you would report in your school system. It's important to also know that when a student exits programming, so if they get that composite 5, or if they are in that sweet spot of a 4.5 through a 4.7, you would, and you do decide to exit those that are in that sweet spot range through the MIP evaluation, then you need to change that to what's to the number 6. The number 6 represents anybody who is a former English learner. So, so anybody who is identified as an English learner, they would have either their current composite score as the number, or they would be identified as a 6 after you exited them. So anyone scoring a composite 5, you exit that student, you would then change that number to a 6. So it's important to know that 6 represents former English learners, and then any number beyond that would be their language level. And then a 7, reporting a 7 is for non-Ls. So any student who is not identified as an English learner in your district is a never L or a number 7. And then the other important stuff, and this is why we kind of highlight the LIEP crosswalk, is that primary service for language instruction. So what is your language program? How are kids being served? You will have to include that also in your data reporting. So keep that in mind. Again, I just want to highlight that this is not exhaustive, so definitely make sure that you have those people who are entering on the English learner page in your school sys, that they are familiar with other things that they will need to be reporting. So, and you can find some of those things on the data element page. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I believe Tanya is going through this section.
Yes, thanks, Amy. So I will take you through to the end of our presentation, just a couple more slides. One other requirement related to English learners is, this is really a requirement for the state, that we're required to adopt English language development standards. And this was a requirement as under Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA. States are required to have these standards. And so Wisconsin did go through this adoption process, I think in 1920 or 2021. And the standards that were adopted are the WIDA 2020 English language development standards. That there's a link there on the page that will take you to the WIDA webpage where you can access the standards. There's also information on our website about the adoption process and about the standards. These standards are aligned to the access test, which is that test of English language proficiency that English learners are required to take. And in addition to the state being required to adopt these standards, then districts and schools are required to implement these standards and use these standards. So if you do have English learners that you're serving in your district or school, in addition to planning for content objectives, teachers should also be looking at these language standards and planning, using that as part of their planning process, so that they're able to intentionally plan lessons that support students' English language development, and that prepare them to be able to take on the language demands of that particular content area that the teacher's doing. We started rolling these out. We're now in the middle of rolling out these standards. So in 21-22, in the past school year, there were efforts to introduce the standards to the field, to make people aware of the standards and of the requirement that they implement these standards. Next year in 22-23, we're going to continue building awareness and understanding of the standards, and also helping people prepare to implement those standards. So we are going to be rolling out a curriculum guide that goes along with the standards, and providing some professional development and technical assistance opportunities that I'll talk about more on a later slide, but that are in support of learning about and using these standards. And so you can see our ELDS webpage for more information about the standards. All right, next page or next slide. So there is also a state level requirement for English learners. So Amy went over all of the federal requirements related to serving English learners. In addition to all of those requirements, there is a Wisconsin state statute related to bilingual education. So bilingual education is when students receive some portion of their instruction in their home language. And so this is something that is required of districts and schools that serve a certain concentration of students from a single language group, or from the same language group. And the number of students that triggers this requirement is different based on the grade level. So as you can see from the slide, if your district serves 10 students or more in grades K through 3 from the same language group, 20 students or more in grades 4 through 8 from the same language group, or 20 students or more in grades 9 through 12 from the same language group, then you do have a requirement to offer the families of those students the opportunity to enroll their children in a bilingual program and to receive bilingual services. So once you hit those threshold numbers, what you are required to do is create and communicate a plan for a you're required to create a plan for bilingual bicultural program, and then communicate that plan to families and let them know that that is an option for their students. If you have a sufficient number of students or families that are interested in that program, then you would go ahead and offer that program. There is a process that you need to go through to submit an initial plan to DPI and get approval for that plan. And once the plan is approved, then you become eligible for reimbursement of a percentage of the costs spent on that program. There are certain staffing requirements related to that. So you do need to have a bilingual teacher if you're working with Spanish speaking students. If students come from another language group that is not Spanish, if you cannot find a bilingual teacher that is fluent in that language, then you can use an ESL teacher and a bilingual aid. So this is just like a very high level overview of this. There's a lot more information about all of these requirements on our bilingual bicultural page. I'm also happy to answer any questions that you might have about this program. All right, next page, slide. Sorry. Okay, so here is a list of some of the professional learning opportunities that we do have available related to English learners coming up this year. WIDA, the organization that has the access, creates the access in the English language development standards, offers a number of self-paced workshops. They'll also be offering 2 series of facilitated workshops in the state. In addition to that, we will be holding a Title III special education collaborative conference in March in Wisconsin Dells. So if you're interested in learning more about the intersection between special education and English learners, that's a great opportunity to do that. We also partner with WRCCS, so those cooperative educational agencies, state agencies. We do partner with them to lead EL networks and consortia. So you can get hooked into the CSA EL network for your region and then attend those meetings and also get more information and be able to network and connect with other folks who are serving English learners. All right, next slide. So there are a number of resources that would be helpful for you and if you want to know more about serving English learners. The big one would be DPI's bilingual and English learners webpage. There's just many resources listed there, as well as a lot of information about the legal requirements there. If you do one thing, I would encourage you to read through DPI's EL policy handbook that contains most of the information that we've presented today and explains it in a lot more detail. It's divided out into chapters. So if you have like you first want to start off with like identification, you can just go there and learn about that. If you're looking at programming, you can go there and look at that. So that's a really helpful resource. The U.S. Department of Education has also developed an EL toolkit and a newcomer toolkit. A newcomer student is a student who is new to the United States, which have a lot of great resources. The Center for Applied Linguistics offers many webinars related to English learners and serving English learners. There are also the WIDA self-paced workshops, which I mentioned. And I would encourage you to, if you do have English learners, to either to join the Title III listserv, and you can contact Amy about that, or the Google Currents community. A lot of information is shared out through the listserv. So important information about testing and training and all of those things. If you want to be in the know about that stuff, join the listserv or the Google Currents community. I also maintain the BLBC listserv. So if you do have a bilingual program and you'd like to be up to date on information related to bilingual bicultural programs in the state, you can use that link to join. All right, I know we are way over time, but if there are any questions.
While we're waiting for questions, I just wanted to mention one more thing. For those of you who are not as familiar with the English language development standards, I did put in the chat a link to the WIDA website. WIDA does offer the framework for a free download for everyone. So if you're looking for more information about the WIDA standards framework, you can get their core books and stuff pertaining to the free or to the standards. You can download that for free at the WIDA website, just to keep you in the loop with that.
Okay, any questions while we have them here? It does not sound like it. Amy and Tanya, I appreciate your time and thank you for being flexible and being here.
Mm-hmm.
And if there aren't any questions, I think we're going to let y'all go and move along. Is there any parting thoughts you have?
No, just thanks for letting us join you today. And yeah, feel free to reach out to us with questions. I know we just threw a bunch of information at you, so.
A lot of information.
Feel free to reach out.
Let us know if you need help or support. We're happy to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, thanks so much.
Sure.
All right, bye everybody.
Bye.
Okay, now I'm going to share my screen again, get back to the appropriate slideshow, and let's see, make this big. Okay, so Ryan is here from the special education team. Ryan has given me plenty of unmerited grace as I've moved his presentation all around, and here we are again. If you are on this call and you can stick around for the entire presentation, I really do encourage you to. But if you have places to run and people to see, we will be sending out these slides, and the presentation is recorded so you can catch it at your own leisure. Ryan, thank you so much for your patience. And do you want to take it away and I'll click through for you?
Ryan, we can't hear you.
You may be muted. Let me try to unmute you.
I don't think so.
Did we lose Ryan?
No, it looks like he was changing headphones. Still can't hear you, sorry. Headset number 2. No. That sounds good, Ryan. Hop off and back on.
While we wait for Ryan to rejoin, I can say some of the things I would have said at the very end right now. If you have any feedback or thoughts about ways that we can improve this going into our 3rd version next year, please email them to me. I already have ideas about what I can do differently, and I would love to hear yours as well.
Thanks, Alex. That sounds great.
I think we've got Ryan back.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Brilliant.
so I just had to, turn it off and turn it back on again. And I apologize for that. And as you can see with this cover page, this presentation was originally created by CISA 1. That's one of the cooperative educational agencies in the state in the Milwaukee area. And I want to give credit to Sue Doyle and Linda Baldus for creating this presentation. And given the time constraints, I think one thing I want to do is point out last year's recording, which is on YouTube, which my colleague Margaret McMurray handled. So she was the first presenter. So if you just start the beginning of that, you can get the full presentation. And Alex, I think maybe what would be better is just to see if anyone has any special education questions for me, and I'll just field those. And I just wanted to point out, so CISA 1 has a discretionary grant that is around to support capacity building in special education. Our gracious host, CISA 9, with the Resource Center, and all of the regional special education network directors can be resources to build capacity and make sure you're compliant from the beginning. So does anyone have any questions about how special education works with independent charters for me?
Ryan, I want to build on that for just a minute. I know that Sue and her team were working on kind of a roadmap, and I have the draft of it, but I wasn't sure if it was ready for distribution. Is that something that we could share with schools now?
I do not have any information on that.
Okay.
Either CISA 1 or maybe my colleague Margaret would know if that's
I'll check
ready.
back with CISA 1. I have the draft and they said they were just kind of getting it finally approved before it's like official. But I think if anybody wants to see the draft, you can send me an email too, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind. It's really helpful. A lot of the stuff that office provides is in these slides too, but I think it's a really nice kind of start to finish.
Yeah, so I guess, one thing I'll say is that with independent charter schools being a local education agency with those responsibilities, you want to look at the big picture, but also realize that for special education, everything is, in terms of deadlines, is individualized in the student with a disability, and will be based on the student's evaluation and when requirements will be met. So one thing that could be really helpful as you're starting out is to work with your student information services vendor to see if they can set up reminders and notifications to make sure that you're tracking everything in an efficient way and not missing deadlines for each student as they come up. And is there anything in the chat? It doesn't look like it, but so I guess if you could, Alexander, just go to the final page on our slide, and that has a link to a bunch of resources that I think are helpful, including CISA 1 and CISA 9 and some DPI pages, and also a Federal Department of Education. I think it's a frequently asked questions document for independent charter schools. I think that was really helpful for me to sort of get up to speed on how it works for charters, because it is a little different depending on what it is. But I think the main gist is that federal requirements will apply even if an independent charter is exempt from some state special education requirements. So I will also provide my email address in the chat in case you think of anything. Well, thank you, Sarah, for linking to that roadmap.
Yeah, and like I said, it is a draft. And so if you have any questions or something seems a little unclear, I think they'd love to still have feedback on it. But last I checked, they kind of said they think it's pretty well set to go. And I wonder, Ryan, as long as we have you here, something that we're often confused about is just sort of who to call for what. And so, you know, like if it's a, you know, question about providing services, if it's a question about an open enrolled student, if it's a question about, oh, I guess open enrolled wouldn't apply here, but like, you know, obtaining records from previous district, or if it's a question about, you know, federal reimbursements versus state, or, you know, just different like licenses. And so I know that all those things I rattled off kind of are different people at DPI. So do you have an easy place or a way to like help us navigate sort of who you're going to call?
Yeah, so I think that starting at the CISA level makes sense to try and be proactive for supports, and then probably the next level, if you want to talk to DPI, would be to look at one of the main pages for each team. So if you have a special education question on our page, which I've linked to, there is a contact form, or you can call the main telephone number from that page. And then, you know, our customer service team has really built up a lot of good capacity for knowing who the right person is to talk to get that next level expertise. And so I think that's probably the best bet for other areas in DPI as well, is start with kind of the main line or email address for the team itself, and then someone there can help guide you.
I think that makes sense. And as you kind of get going, you'll start to sort of compartmentalize like the different things, like, okay, the CISA 1 team is really there. I sort of tell people like to help you figure out your compliance, but not to do it for you. So then if you bring in a special ed director, or you consult with your local CISA to help you actually kind of engage in that compliance work, is different from what CISA 1 does. And then Works is here to sort of dabble in special ed, but not really, because we're kind of doing, all the different topics. And so we can help point you, but not actually be the voice of expertise there. And so it is tricky. And then there's, like I said, the federal funding, the state funding, all these different pieces. So. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'll highly recommend looking at last year's video. Margaret, my colleague that did it. So she's on the special education team, but she also has served on the charter school team at DPI. So she kind of has the whole institutional knowledge, and she gives a nice sort of introduction on the history of charter schools too, which I found really interesting.
And that video from last year is hosted by Works on their YouTube page. It's probably the only 3-hour video on there, so it can't be hard to miss.
Maybe when I send out this recording, I'll send out last year's as well. And then I'll also include like the roadmap and a couple other helpful links.
Brilliant. Okay, it looks like people are starting to have to run to their other meetings, which I suspect is code for lunch. So Ryan, thank you so much for stopping in and being flexible. And thank you everyone for hanging on this long. If you have any questions, you have all our emails. We'll send all this out in a big email as well. And if you need me, I'm always available to help answer your questions. So thanks so much, everyone. And have a good lunch.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you for putting this together, Alex.
Oof, you're welcome. Bye now, y'all.
All right. I'm gonna stop